Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to get started in just a few moments here, just to give everyone else enough time to shuffle in. Um, in the meantime, while we're waiting, I'm Elise Rodriguez. You may have received several emails from me inviting you to our Quick Bite webinar. So thank you for engaging and communicating with me. Some housekeeping. If you have any questions during the duration of the webinar, feel free to put them into the chat or questions area located at the above bar. And what we'll do is at the end, we'll have a Q&A session and we'll be able to answer your questions. At that time, I'll be chatting with you and I'll let you know I've received your question. And then we'll go through them on a first come basis when we get to the Q&A session. Other than that, if you have anyone who wasn't able to attend the webinar but maybe wants the webinar recording or slides, I will be sending them out to you guys after this webinar. Oh, Mona, I can see
Oh,
which.
okay. There we go.
Yeah,
Sorry.
thank you. No worries. I will be sending you the slides and the webinar recording preceding the webinar. If you want me to send them to anyone directly, feel free to shoot me an email and I will do that. So it looks like we are at 1:03 now, so I'll just go ahead and get started. A little bit about us. So ICS was established in 1996. Two separate entities though. So we had IBG and SSG, and we merged together to become ICS. We have offices in Buffalo, Richmond, and Orlando. And we have 300 plus clients, mainly in the GP sector. That is our bread and butter. That's really how we got started. We can go to the next slide, please, Mona. So, as I said, GP is really our bread and butter. We have consultants who have been um, working in GP for over 20 years. That's really the main solution that we support. However, we also have cloud options, two different flavors, Microsoft Dynamics PC and Acumatica Cloud ERP as well. For anybody who's on that migration long-term journey, we can definitely help you with those also. Without further ado, I am going to go ahead and introduce Mona. We're so lucky to have you today heading up this webinar. She's a wealth of knowledge, and you guys are really in for a treat. So, Mona, over to you.
Hi. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mona. I've worked with a lot of you, not everyone just yet. I've been with ICS close to a year now. However, I have been a Dynamics GP consultant since I was a junior in college. So since the early 90s, I've been an end user, and I started out though as an accounting consultant, just working with users on the front end, but have moved all around in the last 30 years. For the last 20 years, my focus has been on distribution and manufacturing, and that's really where I thrive, but I am able to offer assistance in just about any area in the product. So again, I look forward to working with any of you that I haven't worked with yet. I'm going to move into the presentation, so I'll turn off my camera and I'm going to do an intro and then we'll go section by section. I think there's some helpful information for you here. And then at the end, I'll try to leave plenty of time for Q&A or follow-up and getting questions. But if I don't get to any questions from you, please feel free to email me directly, and I'll try to follow up with you after the presentation if we run out of time. Okay? Okay. So today's presentation is really all about data cleanup and data preservation. And I'm going to walk through some of the tools that we use and in order to help you be be educated and show you the tools that we use, tools that you have access to, and educate you so you can help maintain your own data. But if there is anything that you're not comfortable doing, that you don't have security to do, or that you need assistance from us on, then we're happy to apply, all of this for you, or do any consulting with you to help you do the parts that you're not comfortable doing. We're going to talk about the PSTL, which is Professional Services Tools. Professional Services Tools was introduced with every installation of GP, I think starting with GP 2013 or 2015, but it's been quite a while. But it's amazing how many people don't actually know that they're out there or how to use them. So we're going to talk about some of the PSTL that allows you to clean up your data and help you modify IDs, things like that. We'll talk about closing open transactions and how that can improve your system performance and reporting. We'll look at historical data, how you might want to clean up and get rid of some historical data, what some of the methods are, where the utilities are to do that, and some of the reasons why you would want to. We'll look at data integrity, which is going to be check links. Check links has been around uh, since origin, right? But a lot of people forget that it's there and or don't use check links. Some people are a little bit afraid of it. So we'll talk about check links and what it actually does and how you might use it, or call us and have us run check links for you. And then we'll have a quick bite at the end about business preservation, which is just sort of a hot topic, just to call your attention to some things. You've got all of the clean data, but what we really want to do at the end of the day is you know business preservation for you. Okay. So we're going to talk about professional services tools first, and I'm going to walk you through the system. I'm not just going to talk to the slide here. I'm going to walk you through it in GP. We're going to talk about PSTL and some of the utilities that can be applied in GP, and we'll talk about finance, purchasing and payables, sales receivables, payroll inventory, and some miscellaneous. As I said before, professional services tools is in GP, and it began to be available to all um, customers, I think, with GP 2015. Prior to that, it was an add-on tool, and the price was really extraordinary. I think it was somewhere between $5,000 and $7,000, and that was in versions before GP 2015 or 2013. So that was a really high price point. But what professional services tools does is it enables you to go in and modify information that we otherwise can't. So for example, it's something that we would have to go write SQL scripts, but because so many tables are involved, we're very hesitant to do it. Well, Microsoft had developed tools that would run those SQL scripts that could do things like update an ID, something that was a permanent record. And they rolled all of those up into this product called Professional Services Tools. And you can go and use that to do things such as combine IDs, combine records that have been duplicated for different reasons, and I'll demonstrate some of that for you. So let's start with the financial tools first. So what we're looking at specifically is where we would want to combine or modify data that needs to be cleaned up. So I hope that that's big enough that you can see it. But the account modifier is the first one. And it is exactly that. If you have account numbers and you want to renumber or replace, GP does have a tool for doing account modification. Um, then the application itself, but we prefer to come out and use the professional services tools for a couple of reasons. The biggest one being you can import it, right? So if I've got a segment that I want to replace on all of my accounts, let's say my middle segment, and I want to renumber, I want to uh, anything like that. If I use the account modifier right here, first of all, I can use a spreadsheet to do it. So I can give it my original account number, and I tell it what do I want the account number to be now, and I'll hit convert. And that will take that account number 1100, convert it to an 1199. But the other thing that it does is it goes all through the history um, of all my transactions and everywhere that that account number has been used, and it replaces it with $11.99. And the benefit there is that I don't just now have two accounts and one that I can't report on anymore, but it goes through all of the history. So it updates all of my accounts, my inquiries, everything with the new account number. So I don't always have to remember what the old account number was. And you can, again, you can populate this from an Excel spreadsheet by using the import tool, which is, I would just have two columns in it, one with my old number and one with my new number. And it would ask me, okay, column A is my old number, column B is my new number, and it would go all through my spreadsheet, and I can hit import convert, and it would update all of my account numbers. It's much easier than doing it manually. It goes all the way through history for you, and I feel like it's a lot safer than using the mass modify tools in GP, and certainly a lot more convenient for you than doing an integration for new account numbers. Um, The checkbook modifier is similar in that it would allow you, if you've added a checkbook and they have similar names and you want to rename those. As you know, those IDs are permanent, right? They're primary keys, so they can't be changed. But using the modifier here would allow me to uh, rename my checkbook ID. If, for example, I had a Chase Bank, but I've added a new one and I want to change my checkbook ID so that things either look up correctly in the lookup screens, or they, are organized the way I want them to be, or so that I can add Chase 1 and Chase 2, then I can use this and give it my old checkbook ID and my new checkbook ID and hit convert. And before I look at purchasing modifier, I want to show you something else for modifying payables records, and that would be under the utilities for purchasing. A lot of people aren't aware that you have a vendor combiner and modifier. And inevitably, if you've been using GP for a long time and you've had any rotation in your resources, then you have people who couldn't find a vendor and they've added the vendor twice, or they've put the vendor ID in incorrectly, or the vendor has changed their name and you're using alphanumeric and now the vendor ID and the vendor name don't really match. But for a lot of reasons, you might want to modify or combine those vendors. So if you've got a vendor who's been put into GP twice and they both have history. So what you can do is use the vendor combiner and combine them together, and you still have all of that AP history or purchasing history with that vendor, as opposed to inactivating one vendor but losing some of that historical reporting, even since they're the same vendor. The vendor modifier would be in the instance that your vendor's name has changed and you're using something alphanumeric and it's just no longer applicable. They're in the wrong place in the lookup list, things like that. Or if you really just want to rename your vendor for some reason. So you would select the source vendor ID, which is what they are to begin with, and then you would give them, and I am on the So I would have my beginning vendor ID and my ending vendor ID. I can hit process and it will again go all the way through the system and look everywhere historically that I've used this vendor ID and update all of the records so that any reporting stays intact. So if I've changed my vendor IDs or combined vendor records, the other thing that I might want to do is to change the vendor name. And especially with a lot of business consolidations now, we may have vendors who we've got a vendor ID, but they've changed their vendor name. Maybe they're added something to the name, it's incorporated or LLC, and you can go change that on the card. However, the reason you would want to use professional services tools to do it for any reason would be if you want that name change to, roll backwards and show up on anything that you reprint with that vendor on there for that vendor ID. So I would select to change I would select the vendor name modifier, select next, and I would select my vendor, Ace Travel, this is their current vendor name, and I could just change them to travel company and hit convert. Okay. Next is sales, and you've got similar tools for similar reasons within sales and accounts receivable. So again, first I'm going to go look at tools, utilities, sales, and at the very bottom at the customer combiner and modifier. And it's the very same thing. If I have two customers, they're really the same one or they've merged or something for whatever reason, I need to combine them and I want to keep all of the history intact without having an inactive record, I can combine. And the customer modifier is the same thing. I can change the customer ID if I'm changing all of my customer IDs or want to move them up or down or something of that nature. Select my original customer ID, the new customer ID process flows all the way back to every transaction. And then back at professional services tools, I have the customer name modifier, which I might use for the same reason I would use the vendor modifier, which is I want that customer name, especially if I go back to reprint invoices or statements, anything of that nature. That customer name gets stored on those documents. So if I've got to reprint anything, I want it to pull the new customer name. So using that customer name modifier rolls that customer name change down to all documents. So when I reprint them, they've got the correct information on them. We don't have as many people using payroll anymore as we've had in the past, but with the employee modifier, I'm able to change an employee's ID, and this can be applicable if you're um, renumbering your employees, somebody was put in incorrectly, or they've gotten married or had a name change, and you need to change the employee ID so that they fall into the right place in your sort order. The place where we most often use the PSTL, or some people call it pistol for short, is in inventory. And that's because inventory gets moved around, lots of things happen with it. And there's so much to be cleaned up there. We have an inventory site combiner. So if for some reason you've got sites that have been put into GP and they're actually the same site, you can use the site combiner. The inventory site modifier is the same thing. You've got these IDs that you can't change because they're primary keys, but if you wanted to rename your sites so that you get a better sort order or something that you've restructured, for example, and you've got new regions, you've reorganized your regions and you need to rename those site IDs, but they would still be applicable to all the same items or customers or vendors, then using the site ID modifier is very helpful because as you know, if you go set up a new site, you've then got to go do all of those assignments again, and that can be really tedious. So the site ID modifier is very helpful there. There's an item description modifier that is a lot like the name modifier. Yes, you can go change it on the card, but if you would like that description to be changed on all the prior transactions, things like that, then you would use the item description modifier to do that. You pull up the item number, it's going to tell you what the current description is, and then you enter what the new description is. That can also help you to clean up records that maybe came in incorrectly during an import, or maybe they got cut off, or if you've decided that you need to add more definition to the description. There are a lot of reasons you might want to do that. The item combiner is probably the one that we use the most, okay? Because item numbers, specifically if they're just numeric item numbers, can often be found in multiple times in your system. And not just once or twice even, but multiple times. It might be in there as 5 or 6 different things because people, that are going to go sell it or purchase it can't find the original item number. And so they go create a new one on the fly if they have permission to do that. And so then what happens is that your your purchasing or even your selling history for that item, all of your consumption is spread across multiple items. So not really getting a true picture of what's being used. You may not even be getting a true picture of what you have on hand. So you'd want to use the item combiner to bring all of those together, keep your transaction history. It would pull all of your quantities together under a single ID, so that you can actually see what you have on hand and cause a lot less confusion. The item number modifier is if you need to renumber your items. And you can import these as well. So if you've got when first a lot of times when we first do an implementation of a system, it's very hard to know how much that item ID is going to impact your reporting, your lookups, and how the salespeople may look something up versus how a purchasing person might look at something. So you may decide that you need to reconfigure that item number so that it's more intuitive, it reports correctly, it shows up in a way that's better as far as inquiries go, because as you know, when you go to do a lookup, it looks up by item number or item ID. And if you've got an all numeric item number, it's not always intuitive for end users. So you can import these. It's simply a spreadsheet. You would have two columns, the original item number, the new item number, and you just specify column A for the start, column B is the new item number, and you hit import, and it's going to go through. And this one you would definitely want to do a backup, and you would want to do it in a test company first to sort of time it. So we have some customers who may have 200 items, but we definitely have customers who have, 80,000 items as well. You don't know how long this is going to run, or if you're going to run into an issue with any items along the way. So you'd want to do it in test first. Okay. There's also a fixed asset modifier. Same thing. You've got a fixed asset ID. You want to change it. What's my old ID? What's my new ID? And then do a conversion. Okay. Um, that is Pistol in a nutshell. So it's a little bit of Pistol. It's a little bit of utilities to update all of those IDs so that you get better reporting. And for the next section, what we want to talk about, let me get back over to the slideshow for you. It's going to talk about closing open transactions. And two things that are on today's presentation, closing open transactions and cleaning up historical data. And the reason that we're bringing that up to you for cleaning up data is if you've got a lot of open transactions that really should be moved to history, or purchase orders, for example, that should be closed, what's happening is those documents are showing up on your reports, which takes you longer to reconcile. You've got stuff you have to look through, and you're running the report every month, and you're like, okay, well, this is from 10 months ago, but it's still on the report. And it cleans up, you want to go clean up those reports. So you can target what you're really looking for. But also, if you've got a lot of open or inquiry, if you've ever gone into a window and you've hit the little lookup button to go look up a customer or a transaction or anything of that nature, when you're filtering it down and it takes it forever to pop up the list for you, it's probably a good sign that you need to close some open transactions and you need to do some history removal, so those processes will run more efficiently. Some of the screens in GP calculate, so if you've tables before it can give you what you're looking for, the more data you have, the longer it's going to take. You're going to have a longer refresh rate. So we want to talk about closing some open transactions, so your reporting becomes uh, more efficient and more accurate, and so can you. So let's talk about sales documents first of all. So in cleaning up sales documents, the first thing you really want to do is to identify what needs to be cleaned up. And you may know with some of this intuitively, it's already on your reports, but if you really just want to get a bird's eye view of what do I have out there there's an inquiry, sales order document inquiry. And one of the things that you can do is go look up by document type. And if I go look up my sales orders here, and I make sure that I select unposted and I hit redisplay, I'm going to get a list of all the sales orders I have open, and then I can go and address those if they need to be addressed. And I bring this up because I do frequently go into other people's systems and find out that they've got sales orders that have been open for years. And it's just old data that's sitting out there and it's kind of junking things up. Some people, their system is pristine, right? But that's just not always the case, especially if you have any user rotation. So that'll help you look at what do I have open, what's still sitting in open, and that can be for orders as well as invoices. It's very applicable to invoices and quotes also. And I can see what are all of my open invoices. I can do this inquiry here, or I can do the same inquiry over in Smart Lists and customize it to show me more information like balances if I want to. But once I've looked at this and addressed what I can address, then the next thing that I want to do is I want to clean up some of these transactions. So there are two places that I would want to go to clean up my sales. And the first one is going to be in utilities. So in utilities, I've got this reconciliation to remove sales documents. And what that's going to do is going to go out there and it's going to remove any documents that don't have any remaining quantities, but that are not in history yet. And it's going to get those off of all of those open transaction reports and things like that that I'm looking at. And um, when you go in, there are two options. There's a reconcile and there's a remove. So our suggestion would be that you run the reconcile first and look at the report, okay? And then once you look at that, it's going to tell you what it's going to do, and then you can select to do the remove completed documents. So after you've done this, where you've reconciled the sales documents, the other routine that you might want to run is routines sales. And this is the paid transaction removal. And what that will do is if you're keeping history, it'll take all of those paid transactions and move them to history. But if you're not keeping history, the data is otherwise cleared out. And so now you're no longer looking through all of that, and it cleans up any customer statements or inquiries of that nature that you're doing. So that should clean your sales up. There's a very similar process to run for purchasing. With purchasing, there are a couple of ways that we want to look at outstanding POs, right? That's what we find the most often. And you can also go do an inquiry for purchasing, show me all of my open purchase orders, and hit redisplay. Um, because purchase orders can get created and uh, sometimes never even used, right? You do a PO for something, it just sits out there. We have, and I've always seen everywhere I've ever worked, always have customers have lots and lots of POs that go back years. And the unfortunate thing is they can only be closed one at a time. But if we're just starting to look at what do we have, let's start with looking at the document inquiry, or you can look at your received not invoiced report. There's a received not invoiced smart list as well that you can use, which is under the receiving line items. There's a shipments received not invoiced. So you've got open POs and RNI documents that we want to take care of after you do your homework. And again, we're going to go to utilities and routines to start on some of this. As far as closing the POs, actually, let me back up a little bit. Closing POs, as some of you know, you have to go to edit purchase orders. And the problem here is that it's one line at a time, one PO at a time. And that's why so many people end up with years and years of POs that are open. We do have some SQL scripts that Devin has written, and we can use those to help you close all of those POs as long as what do you want closed. So I have customers who come to me and say, okay, well, just close everything before 2022. And you can do that every couple of years. And when you close all of those POs that are just no longer being used, or they're not really supposed to be open, they should be canceled or whatever, It really cleans up that PO inquiry screen a lot. If you use those modules, you'll know how frustrating that can be to have to scroll through. So after you've closed open POs, we'll want to go to, see, I think it's utilities first, to the reconcile purchasing documents. And the reconcile purchasing documents, what that's going to do is going to reconcile my PO balances. So if you've got, and it reconciles everything on there, it'll reconcile the transactions, the quantities, the any calculated field on the purchase order, okay? And you can, again, run the reconcile and print, or you can just print the report before you reconcile it to see what it's going to do. So after you've reconciled your purchase orders, the other thing that you would do is come over to routines for purchasing, and we can remove completed purchase orders. So this is going to take any closed or canceled purchase orders and move them to history if you're keeping history. And again, it just cleans up and makes a lot of those inquiries and reports a lot more efficient. Those two tasks right there, the reconciliation of the purchasing documents and the moving completed POs to purchase order history, those are going to, that's what's going to clean up that received not invoiced report for you. But if you have some of those problem child documents out there, POs, then Devin has also developed a lot of fixes and scripts and things like that that she's tweaked over the years that we actually run pretty routinely at our customers. So if you have too many POs to close manually, let us know. We've got scripts to help. Or if you've got some that you can't get off that R&I report, just some business processes cause problems there, and Devin has some fixes for those as well. Okay. Um, the other thing that often gets messed up as far as, open transactions, not really open transaction, but it does get messed up sometimes between these sales and these purchasing transactions that get stopped, blocked, deleted, are inventory allocations. And just to clean up those allocations, because people run into roadblocks all the time with those, I answer several cases about item allocations on a weekly basis. But you can identify an allocation problem by going to an inquiry and looking at an item. That if you're being told that an item is short, you can go look at the item allocation, and it should tell you based, by site, what you have on hand and what you have allocated. And when you see that you've got something incorrect there, for example, you see that there's an allocation and you try to go to the document number where the allocation is at, but there you don't find a document number. That happens a lot. That can happen when you have an integration that for a lot of people bring in sales order integrations, for example, and the integration is failing, or um, you've deleted a sales order document and it's left some allocations out there. So you can use the utilities inventory reconciliation, and that will reconcile those items for you. It'll reconcile your quantities. If that does not work for you, then we'll probably have to go in with something in SQL. But under this reconcile inventory quantities, you can reconcile a single item, should put those allocations back correctly. If that doesn't work, then we go in with SQL scripts and fix it for you. And you just let us know. So I recognize that I'm at time here. Can I keep going, Elise?
Yeah, you're fine to continue. We're almost through the slides. I just didn't. You were getting into some really great information, and it seems like everyone's really engaged.
Okay.
So I didn't want to stop you. I do just want to let you know I did get a report of your audio cutting out a little bit. So if it happens again, I'll probably just pause you and let you know. We don't have any questions yet, so I'm thinking we'll probably just cut Q&A short since we
Okay.
don't have a lot of questions. And then anyone who has questions after the webinar, I'll make sure to kind of filter those to you that way.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So next I'm going to talk about historical data and cleaning that up. And um, first of all, if you've been using GP for any length of time and you're doing any type of distribution or manufacturing, depending on your transaction volume, right? Your database may be getting large, or and depending on what kind of transactions you do, if you find that you're doing lookups or inquiries on something as simple as sales transactions, but you have to sit and wait for those inquiries to populate, you've probably got too much data because GP is having to go back through and filter everything. And we do see customers specifically in inventory, right? Inventory, those tables can get really big. And so you may want to go do getting rid of some history. There are a couple of different ways to get rid of history to clean up the database, shrink the size, which is good. It impacts performance a lot. If you have a really large database, and you want to have the maintenance done to remove transaction history for you or to back up a historical database on an annual basis, there is software that can do that. Or we've done it manually in the past, which is where we just take a copy of your database, we create a new database, we call it historical, and back up the database there before we purge any transaction history. And when you go to purge history, there you can pick and choose what you want to get rid of. Okay, so you don't have to purge everything from before 2022. You can actually pick and choose and purge things for specific things from specific ledgers if you want to. So I'm going to go pick on the sales ledger, but the same rules apply to all of my subledgers: sales, purchasing, inventory, payroll. So if you go look at the utilities for each of those, you'll see that there's remove transaction, distribution, period, journal, sales, etc. Each one of those does something different, and each one of those um, is is more or less severe than the other. So you have to pick and choose what fits your business model. What do you want to see? What kind of reporting are you still trying to get? So if let's start with at the bottom, let's start with journal history. So if I remove sales history, I'm going to remove everything, okay? But if I remove journal history, what I'm doing is I'm getting rid of all the journals and the transactions, and I can no longer trace my transactions back to their original source. If I'm getting rid of period history, that's periodic history. So I would still have like my calendar or fiscal year history for my customers, but I would no longer have period summaries for the customer. If I get rid of distributions, I'm getting rid of my audit trails, my distributions, and that type of history. All of that will be removed from my subledger. And if I get rid of history, then I'm removing any historical transactions, and those transactions will no longer appear on my subledger reporting. Okay, so each one of those is, or more or less severe, depending on what you want to get rid of. And the truth is, if you decide that you want to back up to a historical database, you can probably get rid in your subledgers at least, get rid of everything prior to a certain fiscal period, and then keep your GL history, right, for GL reporting. This just gets rid of everything in the subledger, not at the GL. And that's really where all of the data and all the slowdown in the subledgers, but you can pick and choose what you want to get rid of. At the general ledger level, though, if you decide to remove history, that is removing account and transaction history that is no longer useful to you, that you're no longer reporting on. You don't have any more pending audits or anything of that nature, and it's okay for it to just go sit in a historical database somewhere or to be purged completely. And that is at the general ledger level. You could get rid of information at the GL and leave it in the subledger, or vice versa. And then the last thing I want to talk about is going to be data integrity. And I've got one more little tidbit after this, but data integrity, and that's going to be the check links. Some people are probably familiar with the check links, some people may not be. And not everybody has access to check links, and some people are just not comfortable running it. When I started consulting a long, long time ago, we data integrity was was not as good as it is now. So we ran check links every month, right? We would do a month end close and we ran check links on everything before we did month end close. But again, that was pre SQL as we know it now. It was B-tree. uh, We just had a lot more issues. And you'd have a lot more locked batches, but technology has improved. But there's still a lot of benefit to running check links. We sometimes run it just as a maintenance because we've got something broken and we feel like check links will fix it for us. Or we run it because, okay, nothing else is working. Let's just see what checklinks does for us. What it does is it goes and looks in the SQL tables where the data is stored, and all of your transactions have many parts and pieces. And what it's doing is to look to make sure that all the relevant required parts and pieces exist and they exist in all the right places. So if you've had a failed batch, sometimes you'll know that it's showing up in open end in history. I don't know what to do. I tried to post it and it failed. And so we will go run check links and it'll put the records back together for us. Sometimes it will repair some of the inventory records where we've got broken reconciliations, things like that. But what you would find the most useful for you is going to be usually in the transactions, right? So where you've got open transactions, which are work transactions, or sales transactions. Let's see, I would probably go and run this on open transactions or on sales work. Um, Inventory, often we'll go and run that on transaction work. Sometimes we end up running it on an item master. Uh, and again, it's something you can do routinely, do a backup of your system, and you can run check links. And sometimes we run check links and we find out that there's a batch from years ago that's left a bunch of dirty data sitting out in the tables, and that data may not rear its head for a couple of years, but if you run check links, it'll kind of pop up and show you, and then you can take the necessary steps to clean it up. And again, do a backup first, or you can back up your company into a test database and run all the check links that you want just to see what kind of stuff pops up. If you're having any issues with phantom in the system, that type of thing, you can run check links just to see if it pops something up for you. Okay, so that's everything that I have as far as data cleanup, and I hope that some of you picked up some tips there, got some ideas about things that you want to clean up. And the last thing that we wanted to do is just what I have for you is just talk about business preservation. Since I have a large audience here, I want to bring up and just always keep in the front of your mind business preservation and talk to you about ransomware and what we see so that you'll know. I would say that in the last 4 to 5 years, that the number of ransomware attacks that we see with our customers who are small businesses and they don't feel like they're relevant enough to be a threat, so they find themselves unprotected. And I would say that I remember starting out with one or two of those attacks per year, but I would say that I'm working on somebody's ransom attack on a monthly basis now. So it's become a lot more relevant. And what you need to know is that recovering from a ransomware attack can cost you, tens and tens of thousands of dollars. The cheapest recovery that I have seen so far, what ran somewhere close to 80 grand. I have seen the recovery efforts run closer to 200K. I've also seen companies shut down and say we can't recover. Okay. So the way that people are being ransomed most often is we're seeing that there's remote access to the system, that they're a backdoor. One of the reasons that the recovery effort is so expensive, in every case where I've had to work on a ransomware recovery, they did not have access to recent backups. And almost every recovery that I work on, the most recent backups are at least 2 years old. So if you can imagine putting together the last 2 years of data for your company, and how would you do that? So the advice that we want to give to you is, if you're on-prem, you know, check with your IT network provider, make sure where are your backups, and do a backup restore test. Ask them, give me a point in time backup. Give me a backup from April and let's do a test restore, because backups may be running, but they may not always be able to be restored. Okay. Find out where your backups are stored, because often when the ransomware hits your company, it hits your backup system too, if your backup system is not offline somewhere else on another network. And that's the problem we have the most often. And then the other problem we have is the backups are not being run at all. And people, their backups go down. Nobody's the gatekeeper there. And you find out that your last backup was 2 years ago because they failed and nobody noticed. So you kind of have to be your own advocate there. Make sure you have those backups. That's the biggest thing you're going to do to bring down the recovery cost if you get hit with ransomware. And the other thing that I've seen that's been very, very effective, organizations I've worked with have had, there's a lot of information out there that you can give to your employees that teach them about phishing emails. And a lot of them require, they can send a test out to your employees take it, test. Most of them are entertaining videos. There are a lot of different vendors that'll provide that type of training for your employees, but that's your number one defense against ransomware, is training your employees about what to, protecting your network and not opening things like phishing emails, stuff like that. So um, that's business preservation quick bite I have for you. And that's everything for my presentation. So if you want to open it up for questions, Elise.
All right, now is the time for questions. If you can't think of anything right now, don't worry. I'm going to be sending out, as I said, the webinar recording and slides, so you can always just respond to that email directly, and I will make sure that it gets to Mona. While we're waiting to see if any questions come through, I do just want to say I love that you ended on business preservation. And I think that it ties in with last month's webinar just so eloquently.
Okay.
And I'm gonna make sure that I also add a link to our backup and server maintenance webinar in the follow-up email for anybody who maybe didn't catch that. Chris Caslow and Devin were on that webinar, and they talk about best practices for maintaining your servers and backups. So um, I don't see any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and call it.
Okay.
Mona, thank you so much for your time today. Everyone who joined us on this webinar, we really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to go over best practices with us. We're going to continue to curate these webinars for you all. If you have any ideas or any areas in GP that you want us to take some time and dig deeper into, I'm so happy to coordinate that for you guys. Our top priority is giving you guys the tools to run your system optimally. So, oh, actually, I think there is one question. Oh, it was a compliment. You did a great job, Mona.
Oh, thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
As well. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.